Hello. All right. Quickly to introduce, I am Gabby Getz. I lead development on the Cesium JS team. I've been at Cesium about 7 years now, and over the course of my time here, I've spent a lot of that time working closely with the open source community. I also contributed to 3D Tiles as an editor on the 1.0 spec. And then, Janine?
Hi, I'm Janine. I've been here for 2.5 years now. I first started on Cesium JS before moving full-time to the native runtimes squad where we manage our Unreal and Unity integrations. I'm also pretty active on the forum. Managing multiple engines means you have to manage multiple communities, so I have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, so we are going to, instead of talking about what we're working on, we are talking about how we work on it. So to start off, as Julian alluded to earlier, it's difficult to quantify adoption directly, but we have typically used downloads in order to approximate that. So the chart that you're looking at here is Cesium JS downloads over the 10 plus years that it's been open source. And with over 10 million downloads today, we've grown exponentially, as you can see, over those past 10 years, and that has fundamentally been thanks to a strong open source community. To give you kind of some scope of the timeline just from the perspective of the community itself, this was in 2012. This is when Cesium JS first went open source. And along with it, the community forum was initially started so that developers and members of the community could have open conversations about what's going on. This was later in the year in 2012. This was the first external contribution to Cesium JS, and this was by a contributor named Chris Cooper, and he is a part of a company called Propeller, who actually builds construction management software on top of Cesium JS. In 2015-ish, this is the first contribution to the 3D Tiles repo via pull request. And this is actually a little sketch that Patrick did that ultimately became the diagrams that you see in the 3D Tile spec today. Fast forwarding a bit to the release of Cesium Native, the native runtimes, and Cesium for Unreal. This is the first external contribution to Cesium for Unreal. This was actually a developer from Epic, I believe. Yes. And then, fast forward again, and this is when we announced our ecosystem grants program run by Danielle, and that is basically when you start to see us investing back into the ecosystem and making sure that we're giving money so that we could build it up. Yes, so fundamentally, community is always at the core of what we do. We rely on them to drive our roadmap, to give feedback, to contribute and grow the project. I wish it would animate. Why isn't it animating? All right. Well, the globe should be spinning, and you should be seeing little data points all over the globe of all of the, in this case, it's specifically GitHub contributions that have been made to Cesium products over the years. But it is worldwide, around the globe, not just in North America, because it should be animating. And now it's gone away. What's happened? There we go. Cool. So taking a step back, looking at what the community looks like. This is, I called it the anatomy of the community, and Danielle told me it's called also referred to as a community of practice. But basically, open source projects and communities in general are kind of made up of multiple layers of different types of participants. At the core, we have those people who are putting in the most effort, who are doing a lot to drive development and ultimately kind of facilitate and make decisions. This has been us, the Cesium colleagues, historically. You have contributors, so these are people who are outside that core group of developers or committers. but contribute back to the project in some meaningful way. For instance, in Cesium.js, we have over 330 lifetime contributors, those people who have signed like a CLA, a license agreement to contribute code back to our software. And then you have this really broad ring around the outside, which is made up of the users, both the actual developers who are building on top of the libraries and using standards that are making thousands of apps, but you also have the millions of end users that are ultimately using those applications. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Janine.
Cool. So I'll continue on the idea that Gabby brought up in the previous slide about engaging as many users as possible and how we position ourselves in open source development, standards, and ecosystems to reach a broader user base and create avenues for users to actually move into that ring of contributors. But first, who are our contributors? Well, developers can contribute to open source software for a variety of reasons, whether it's because they are long-term users that see a need they want to fulfill, perhaps they found solutions for their own use case that they would like to give back to the community, or perhaps they just want to build long-lasting relationships with us or the community, or be good FOSS citizens or free and open source software citizens. We've also had contributions from people who are encouraged to do so by programs such as the Job Training Coordination Program, or JTC, or Google Summer of Code. There are even a few classes at universities from Penn, Drexel, and Swarthmore that all require such contributions to open source software. So they happen for a variety of reasons and does come from a great variety of people. And encouraging community contributions is one of the ways that we grow an open ecosystem for 3D geospatial. At Cesium, we don't believe in vendor lock-in. We want users to be able to freely use the software in formats that fit their needs, and we intend to reflect this in our maintenance of open source software, open standards for data formats, and open APIs for customization and integration. So because of that, users are naturally going to seek to contribute features, integrations, or support for formats that enable them to take advantage of Cesium in combination with other tech. And those additions enable users to then choose one or more parts of our stack and combine them with others like Esri. It's probably been hammered in your head right now, but Cesium contributes to open standards, namely 3D tiles and GLTF. And in 2015, we submitted 3D tiles to OGC, had the spec approved as an official community standard. In the past, we've actually worked with individual customers to advance the spec in a way that meets their needs, but always with the intention of making these updates available to the rest of the community as well. We've also contributed to the GLTF spec in collaboration with the Chronos group, and GLTF being the efficient transmission format for 3D models. It's especially relevant for us, the 3D tiles, because we want to efficiently and incrementally stream 3D data. In the past, we've come up with GLTF extensions, like Sean has alluded to, and we've developed them to meet certain needs for us that we then wanted to present to the community and explore as options for them to use for themselves. And we also get involved in groups like the Metaverse Standards Forum, of which Patrick was actually on the board of directors for. And currently, he co-chairs a group called 3D Asset Interoperability using USD and GLTF. And we're also a member of the Alliance for Open USD. And I want to expand on a point that comes up often when working with open standards, because the nature of open standards is to make it workable for others beyond ourselves for the broader community. And because communities are so large and so diverse, this is naturally going to lead to some differences in how people think a standard should work or what function it should serve. And when we broach these conversations in the community, we don't want to barge in with thinking that we have the right answer, because we often don't. We often want to come with tentative proposals or prototypes, maybe the beginnings of solutions to what we find to be a problem in the ecosystem, at least for us. And we enter with the mentality that this is something that we're working on for a certain context, and it addresses our needs in this way, but then turn to the community, what do you think about it? And people who feel strongly about these are naturally going to speak up about it. We may have some community members who are super eager and enthusiastic about our early work. And we may have others who have reservations and some that may disagree entirely. And if we receive that feedback, we have to take it in earnest and show grace and humility in what we do. And we can use these as opportunities to ask more about what other users in the community are even doing and what circumstances make them feel that way, that this is currently not appropriate for them. And the community will not entirely agree 100% of the time, but we can certainly be inclusive and try to find middle ground. And that's just part of participating in such a large community, and especially an important skill for getting buy-in for open standards. As has been alluded to previously, we also support the community with our Cesium Certified Developer Program and our Ecosystem Grants Program. We created the Certified Developer Program to recognize the technical expertise of developers who build on the Cesium platform. So we have over 90 certified individuals and organizations in our directory who continue to update and maintain their certification. And then we have Ecosystem Grants, where we funded efforts to grow the 3D geospatial ecosystem, and that can take on many forms. One of those forms can be creating learning content for beginners to get up to date about geospatial and how to create apps with the real world data. Another might be adding support for open data formats or features to other open software in the ecosystem. For instance, 3JS is another open source runtime for visualizing 3D scenes, and we gave an ecosystem grant for implementing support for 3D tiles in 3JS and other features on top of it. And it may appear competitive for us to fund the development of 3D tile support and some other web render, but at Cesium, we see it as the opposite. We want to have more support for 3D tiles to grow the adoption of the spec and empower the geospatial community by increasing the ways in which people can create their apps. And to echo what Patrick said in his opening remarks, at Cesium, we focus on the collective success of the ecosystem, and in that effort, our individual success is going to follow. All right, back to Gabby.
Yeah. So another key part we see of growing the community is to celebrate contributors. Generally, what Janine talked about with the different types of people who contribute to open source and what motivates them, a lot of that is external. Like, hey, I have a project, there's a bug in this software that I depend on, and I need to fix it. So that external motivation is good, but you also want to build up internal motivation because studies show that is more of a motivator. Sometimes that's produce good software, sometimes it's the challenge and educational value of working on hard problems, but ultimately humans have a built-in desire to work with other humans and be recognized for their work. So what we try to do is kind of architect our processes around our community to give that status and thank those that are putting out work. So this can be as straightforward as these are the release notes from our latest Cesium.js release. Two of the main highlights were both contributed by first-time contributors, so we can just drop their GitHub usernames, thank you, in a blog post. Thanks goes a long way. I don't know why this isn't showing it. There we go. Tweets for first-time contributions are also a good way that we popularize this. This is a user who added time dynamic lighting to the globe in Cesium.js. So we recorded that, made a great GIF, and sent it out to our socials. We have, as you heard from Monica, tons and tons and tons of success stories on our website, pages and pages, celebrating the things that people have built with our open source software and open standards. And we also like to promote and boost any social media message with users saying, hey, I built this on Cesium. It was an awesome experience. This is Professor Hidenori Watanabe from the University of Tokyo. He is both a Cesium grant recipient and a Cesium certified developer. I'm going to call for some audience participation real quick. What is a contribution? Who wants to tell me what a contribution is? Come on. Just scream it out. A pull request. Code. Hooray. What else? Yeah, code reviews, documentation, anything else? Examples, tutorials, tests, sample data, test cases, answering a forum question, or success stories. So basically the point is that contribution is not just I wrote a line of code or I fixed a bug. It goes to all the way up to just somebody who goes out there and advocates for you or writes a tutorial and puts it out there. And we want to make sure we're recognizing that as well. For instance, Esri recently made Cesium JS a supported runtime for their ArcGIS location services, and they put together a ton of awesome documentation about how to use their technology with Cesium JS. So we wanted to boost that message, of course. And it can be things like going to a conference, talking to users, giving users or people who build awesome stuff with your software a spot in your booth at a conference, seeing people do presentations that boost what you are working on, or even this is a contributor who wrote a book on Angular, included an entire chapter about how to set up Cesium JS in Angular. We send out t-shirts for people who help out on the forum. We like to call out when people go out of their way to provide help to others, and reward them for that. And then back to Janine.
Switch. So hopefully we've convinced you that open source and fostering an open community is really great, but then comes the question of how do you actually foster this community? And that can be a very daunting idea, can be very abstract, but part of that is communication, which is super important to us at Cesium, both internally to us for our Cesium teammates and externally with our community members. We have a culture of meticulously recording our discussions, decisions, and takeaways, while also creating opportunities for others to share their input. And this is all made possible by sticking to the principle of write it all down, especially on GitHub. And in this way, we're pushing ourselves to be radically transparent. By default, we hold public discussions about our code and our roadmap so that anyone in the community can see what we're working on. We open early GitHub issues for any upcoming ideas and seek community input on them, even without having a solution or a finished product at the time. And sometimes people will actually have already wanted that for a long time, and you're just validating that their desires. Another outcome of running things on GitHub is that it becomes an archive of project code, strategy, and decisions that is all open and accessible. It's not buried in email or in history on Slack or Teams for you. You can see our strategy today and from years ago when it was first developed, and that documentation helps us scale. New team members can quickly get up to speed on discussions or decisions or whatever is relevant to the work that they're currently trying to do. We also cross-link to other issues, other pull requests, and forum threads as much as we possibly can on GitHub. This helps us to create an archive of links from which we could easily search topics on our posts about the same topic. And at the end of the day, our transparency and our careful documentation are doing a favor for us, for our future selves. We're ultimately creating a history that serves as a foundation of context and knowledge for those in the future to learn and get up to speed on where we are today. And we're intentionally mindful about setting up the next generation of contributors as well, Cesium colleagues or community members, for future success. And our care in these processes is key to the health of our open source software and user base, if not our company as a whole. We also want to be extra careful with the tone that we set in our public channels, because the example we set is what the community will follow. So when we abide by a code of conduct, so we do abide by a code of conduct, and although occurrences are rare, we do point community members to it when we need to, but it's not going to be effective if we don't embody that ourselves. We also want to demonstrate empathy for users and our contributors across the board. When we interface with an open source community, you're going to find a large diversity in the user base. And people can be greeting you with a lot of emotions, maybe really strong enthusiasm, and maybe some will be really eager to contribute. They just need a bit of support and direction. Others can be confused. Others can be frustrated by what they perceive as a deficiency in the code. So empathy is super important to have. It's a skill that needs to be consistently practiced when you're doing this outward-facing work. For instance, with respect to code contributions specifically, sometimes we might want to leave feedback on like a pull request on GitHub without discouraging or demoralizing the user. So we emphasize the idea that any comments we leave on GitHub contributions are only about the code itself. You want to frame it from the reference of what is this code doing versus what is this person doing. At the same time, we do have ways that we want to operate our open source software, and we have to make sure that any contributions that come in do abide by some standards that we set. So we have to think about this in the way of influencing our contributors without authority. We can't obviously force these people to do things. They don't work for us. Instead, we can give them guidance in the direction for where it would be best for all of us. So for instance, here's some guiding principles that we follow when leaving feedback on community contributions. We start with thanks. We always acknowledge the contributor's effort to validate their time and initiative. Not everyone goes out of their way to contribute code to someone else's repository, so you want to thank them for it. And you also want to provide context about what they've given you. If the code is mostly on track and needs a few tweaks, make sure to say that. If there are larger changes that are needed, try to frame that as a sort of an open discussion rather than a simple one-time critique and closed critique. Use guiding questions when giving feedback. Questions invite discussion and can also be a more gentle way to suggest these changes. For example, you might say, would the code's purpose here be more obvious if it was separated in its own file with its own documentation? Even checking in with a simple, what do you think, helps to set that inclusive tone and get a discussion going. Lastly, try to present evidence for your feedback where possible. In Cesium.js, as well as our native runtimes, we have coding style guides, testing guides, so on and so forth. So ideally, every suggestion that we give should be backed up by authoritative sources that we publish, like our coding guides, to indicate how we're giving feedback for the sake of maintaining the robust code base, rather than just deferring to our personal opinions. Okay, how about the PRs that we open? Well, this is an example of how we've used GitHub to inform our community of a big potentially breaking change. We had this PR to upgrade Cesium.js from WebGL 1 to WebGL 2, and these changes were going to affect literally all of the shaders written for Cesium.js. So that had the potential to be huge. And we wanted to make sure that before this was merged, that the community had ample notice and also had the chance to weigh in if they had any questions or concerns. This particular example actually was really smooth. We only had positive GitHub reacts and a single nice on a community comment. So even so, it was still important to provide that opportunity and a place for people to give that feedback just in case. And for other big features or changes, this may not be so smooth. So we have to recognize that our work is going to affect our numerous users, and we want to give them the reasons for everything that we do, to validate their concerns and support them through the process. The last thing we want to do is to frustrate our users and hide decisions from them and make them feel unheard. Besides GitHub, the other major avenue that we use to reach our community is the community forum, which started as a Google group a long time ago before we migrated to the official forum format. Here in the forum, Cesium teammates and other community members can exchange knowledge and tips, help each other out, share their work, and give feedback. It's important for us to maintain this because it really is a glimpse to the health and needs of our community. And we're so committed to maintaining this forum that we have a dedicated forum guide in our GitHub, of course, outlining best practices for navigating this forum as an official Cesium team member. And similar to GitHub, we use the forum as a way of communicating news to our community, of getting input and feedback to inform our future roadmap. But it's a bit more freeform than GitHub, where we might dedicate issues to certain topics, and they can be a little bit fragmented. On the forum, it's a little bit more freeform. You could talk about anything. And there also are developers or users who aren't developers and might not have GitHub, so we don't want to exclude them too. And the forum is also a place where users can share what they're working on and announce their projects. This user in particular was someone we were helping for a bit on the forum for Cesium for Unity, I believe. And after some trouble resolving their issues, they posted this announcement unprompted about their Glidersim app. So it's actually a really nice place for us to celebrate what the community creates, and also a great way to source user stories, whispers Monica. And engaging with our community can be really rewarding. It's great to see posts in response to your effort that have a positive energy. I think this means that you're doing a good job. And we want to keep up the work that we can to maintain this positivity. We actively help our community on a regular basis ourselves, but ideally, other community members would feel included enough and safe enough to participate themselves and help each other out without us even asking. So we want to set this example and nurture an environment where the community is active and can positively grow and support each other of their own accord. And of course, we don't always get this perfect. This is an example where we were completely outdating GLTF1, switching to GLTF2. We thought GLTF2 is out for a while, but no one's using GLTF1 anymore. We were wrong. And we always, give our best efforts, but sometimes we don't reach users in a timely manner or understand their needs from a glance, and that can lead to frustration. And we have to be ready to hear people out, admit our mistakes, and show accountability. Similar to the principles I mentioned for facilitating open standards, engaging deeply with the community requires you to be honest and accountable and humble and take things in good faith. We find next steps to refine these procedures next time to minimize the pain points that these kind of issues come across in the future. And at the end of the day, users want the tools that they need to create their software, and we want to help them achieve that. So whatever happens, always return to those basic principles and reflect on how we're doing things so that we can improve for our future. All right, Gabby, back to you.
Cool. So one last point here is about kind of one of the biggest challenges of working on open source, open standards, and that is your own time. We're busy people. We have a lot of things to work on. It can be difficult to do things like prioritize a pull request, provide reasonable levels of support, maintain the code that you have, all that, and on top of that, answer everybody's questions that they have coming in. So we often say, and I believe this comes from a book called Producing Open Source Software, which is a very good book on this, open source your code, not your time. So we have a few techniques around this. One is this concept of shifting left. So left being here as there's a timeline from left to right over the course of, say, a contribution. The further to the left that you catch an error and communicate that back to somebody, the easier it is to fix that error. So for instance, you have code in your IDE, then you commit it, you run CI, and then ultimately there's a human in the loop that reviews it. We want to catch things before we put a human in the loop as much as possible. We want to automate things as much as we can. Also, it's really important to remember that timely feedback is really key to keeping engagement high. We like to say that we ideally respond within like a 24-hour period in order to keep people interested and active. So there's a few different ways to do this. One is we make heavy use of GitHub Actions. We ensure code quality through unit tests, code scanning. We enforce our style guide through formatters and linters, and we're starting to set up security tests through things like secret testing, checking, and vulnerability scanning. And basically, because ultimately the person who is reviewing the code does not have to focus on these things, they can focus on the bigger picture issues, and you can focus your attention on the things that will produce the most value. We also automate things as simple as like CLA verification. So you have to sign a license to be able to contribute code. So we automate, hey, did they sign that? And then as you saw in that diagram, the further to the left that you move things, the better it is for the contributor to fix it. So making sure we set up like commit hooks. So when a user goes to commit code, or if we can make use of VS Code extensions as much as possible so they can fix it in the editor while they code. Another big part of this is making sure developer documentation is there and that it's robust. A lot of times this documentation is a lot more social than it is technical, explaining how the developers interact with each other and with users and how to get things done. It can provide pointers to things like the forum and how to interact with other developer, instructions on how to submit a bug report if it does come up, instruction how to open a PR, and ultimately just like an indication of how decisions are made on this project. It's really important to, as Janine said before, write everything down, and this includes codifying your systems and your traditions. Finally, we treat our documentation like code. We check it into the repository, we review updates, we lint it. This is essential to make sure the documentation is staying useful and up to date. You can't change a code or a process without also changing the documentation to match, and contributors can make suggestions and fixes. Finally, as much as possible, tell people what you need before they even hit the submit button to communicate with you. So we make heavy use of templates and forms in order to get the information we might need from a bug report or to make review on a pull request as streamlined as possible. So yeah, that is how we develop open source.